We'd like to turn to the 48th Psalm. Psalm 48. This particular psalm is in the category of what is known as the Songs of Zion. Those songs would include Psalm 46, this Psalm 48, Psalm 84, Psalm 87, Psalm 122. We read in Psalm 137 and verse 3, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion," which would refer back to these particular songs. The characteristic of these songs is that they extol the characteristics of Zion or Jerusalem. So in this 48th Psalm, the psalmist in verses 2 and 3 speaks of the beauty of Zion or Jerusalem, one and the same. In verses 4 through 7, he speaks of the futility of enemy attacks against Zion. In verse 8 through 11, there is joy over God's saving acts and defeating the enemy. In verses 12 and 13, the psalmist speaks of Zion being unconquerable. So, in the psalmist is awed by the greatness of Zion. Yet, he was more so by God. He knew the greatness of the city pointed to the fact that God had blessed them and of the greatness of God. In Psalm 48, we'll read verse 1 and we'll read verse 14. "Great is the Lord, therefore greatly to be praised in the city of our God," that's Zion, "in the mountain of His holiness," still speaking of Zion. Verse 14, "For this God is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even unto death." So these two verses, the first and the last verse of the psalm, express praise and confidence in the Lord. And though most, again, view the psalm as a psalm celebrating God's deliverance of Jerusalem or Zion, it's really a psalm celebrating God. It is a psalm of joyfulness in God. It is a psalm of reverence for God. It is a psalm about God. The name God in this psalm is mentioned 8 times. The name Lord is mentioned 2 times. He is also, in verse 2, referred to as the great King and the Lord of hosts 1 time. In addition, there are pronouns referring to Him: His, thou, thy, he, 9 times. All total, that's 21 references to God in this psalm. With that in mind, it is a psalm about God. The theme of the psalm is established in the very first words. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. So it is a psalm of the greatness of God and praising Him for such and rejoicing in such. In the psalm, we read verse 1 of His holiness. In verse 3, we read that He's a refuge. We read of some of His works in verse 7. Verse 9, there is mention of His loving kindness. Verse 10, we read that His right hand is full of righteousness. Verse 11, there's mention of His judgments. And then it comes to verse 14, which I believe is the high note of the psalm. And coming to this last verse of the psalm, it is for this, something very particular, for this God, the God presented in the psalm. For this God is, that is, present tense, ongoing, always. For this God is our God. This God is our God. That shows us the personal practicality of God. He's not just some nebulous idea. He's reality. So our subject this morning is this God is our God. I believe, again, that verse 14 is the high point of praise in the psalm. In this verse, it is stated that God is particular. This God means He's preeminent. This God, very particular, preeminent. He's personal. He's our God. Do you know this God as your God? It's permanent, forever and ever. This God is our God, forever and ever. This God is God, forever and ever. This God is our God, forever and ever. He's also pastoral. He will be our guide, even unto death. That is, He's relevant to life. And that's how the psalmist sees it. And we need to remember those things as we go into the message. Again, the immediate context of this God would refer to how He is mentioned in the 48th Psalm. But without doing any injustice to Scripture, we can take this beyond the 48th Psalm to everything that this book says about Him. This God, as He's described in His Word, is our God. That ought to rejoice our hearts. We need to realize the blessing of such. So we want to look in a survey type way, not of how God is presented in His Word. How God is presented in His Word. How God is presented in His Word is very different than how man perceives Him. Very different than the thoughts of man. But this book proclaims, declares, and describes God. It is a book that portrays God. And as we look at it, we need to remember this God is our God. The Bible opens with a very monumental statement And we've preached on this many times. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So as soon as you open the book, there's that statement. And immediately, first sentence in the book, people are offended. People disagree. First sentence. In the beginning, God. The fourth word of the book is God. In the beginning, God. So the Bible opens with the existence of God, with the reality of God. In the beginning, God. A very emphatic and straightforward declaration of the existence of God. Does not offer proof, does not make an argument. It is a statement of fact. In the beginning, God. Very emphatic statement. And then from that point forth, the Bible is a presentation of God. The Bible presents detail after detail of who and what God is. And after every presentation of God in this book, you and I that know Him with hearts filled with awe and humility and assurance can say, this God is my God. This God is our God. Oh, how blessed to be able to say that, to be able to know that. Again, how God is presented in the Bible is different than the God that man has imagined in his own twisted mind. But we, the saved, can see God set before us in His Word. And we can boldly and confidently and humbly and joyfully say, this God is my God. And He will be my guide even unto death. This God is our God. We need to live that. We need to live life. This God is our God. We need to go forth out there knowing that this God is our God. So how does the Bible present Him? Well, the very first verse of Psalm 48, great. He's a great God. All through the Bible, greatness is ascribed to God. First four words of this psalm, great is the Lord. That speaks of His vastness. It speaks of His extensiveness. How He's immeasurable. It speaks of His infinity. Great is the Lord. That's a declaration of His significance. Today, people want to imagine a God that is insignificant. Well, that's not God. Great is the Lord. It's a declaration of His prominence and His distinction. God is unequaled. God is incomparable. He's unrivaled. He's unsurpassed. In all that God is, He excels everything else. He is more immense than everything else. He is superior to all else. We see greatness again ascribed to God throughout. the Word of God. We read in Psalm 145:3, "Great is the Lord, His greatness is unsearchable." How great is He? I don't know. No one knows. It's unsearchable. It's unsearchable. Psalm 150 verse 2, we read of His excellent greatness. How great is He? His greatness excels. What does it excel? It excels everything. We need to ponder such, because the common spiritual disease of all humanity causes man to want to reduce God to a manageable size. That's not God. To so reduce Him that He can be flattered and bribed. This is the mentality, and God's people are guilty. Well, I made a deal with God. Really? Now, who do you think you are? You made a deal with God. That shows that you have in your mind a God that can be flattered and bribed. Lord, I'll do this if you do that. That's not God. So they try to reduce man so that he can fit into their plans and their schemes. To so reduce him that his commands and his threats mean nothing. That's the God that man has created in his mind. But here Jesus say in John 10:29, "My Father is greater than all." It is a greatness that excels. That greatness needs to get a hold of us. He is not the God that depraved and carnal minds have manufactured. That's not God. And this God, whose greatness excels all, He sustains us. He watches over us. He provides for us. He surrounds us with His presence. And He excels and is more immense and superior to whatever problems and trials and difficulties and needs that come into our life. He excels them all. This God is our God. And there is nothing that can come into my life bigger than God or even comparable to God. So no matter what, God is bigger. And this God is our God. Genesis 17 verse 1, this God is, He says, "I am the Almighty." I am the Almighty. You need to hear God say that. I am the Almighty. And then know that this God is our God. This God is our God. He is the God of all might. And He's our God. He does not derive His power from anywhere else. God's power is Himself. He's almighty. His power is as great as Himself. And therefore it's unsearchable. And it excelleth everything else. This God, who spoke the universe into existence. Let there be, and it was so. He's an able God. He's an able God. He's the creator of all things, visible and invisible. He is the creator of every form of energy, of every form of matter, the creator of the speed of light, the creator of nuclear structure, the creator of electromagnetism, the creator of gravity, and every law by which nature operates. God's the creator. And He's our God. This God is our God. This God that parted the Red Sea and brought Israel over on dry ground, He can still part the waters. And He's our God. The God who led the children of Israel through the wilderness and fed them still can lead His people and provide for His people. And He's our God. He sweetened the bitter waters. And He still can. And He's our God. He brought down the walls of Jericho. And He can still bring down any wall that man may erect. And He's our God. This God gave Gideon and his 300 men victory. And this God is still able to use the few and feeble. And this God is our God. The God who caused David to defeat Goliath is still a God who topples giants and can still give victory over insurmountable odds. And He is our God. This God who heard and answered the prayer of Elijah on Mount Carmel is still the God who hears and answers the prayers of His people. And He is our God. This God who increased the widow's oil still can. And He's our God. This God who delivers from impossible situations and breaks the chains and sets His people free still does. And this God is our God. This God who met the 3 Hebrews in the fiery furnace, He'll still meet you there. And this God is our God. The God who shut the mouths of lions is still a God in control. And He's our God. The God who gave life to a bunch of dry, scattered bones, putting it all back together, can still put the pieces together. He still can. And He still does. And this God is our God. And He sustains me and watches over me and provides for me and surrounds me with His presence. And He excels and He's more immense and He's superior to whatever problems or difficulties or trials and needs that come into my life. There's nothing that can come into my life comparable to I am the Almighty. I am the Almighty. Oh, may that be a reality in our life. This God who excels all, who is almighty, is sovereign. He's sovereign. That means He reigns. He's in control of all things. It means He's God. It means He's God and we're not. He's God. He rules and reigns. Psalm 103:19, the Lord hath prepared His throne in the heavens. His throne is established. His throne is fixed. All the strugglings of man and of devils cannot overturn it. Cannot even shake His throne. Come what may, the Lord God will still be on His throne and still be in control. He again is the creator. He's the controller. He's the ruler. He's the sustainer of all. And He's my God. All through the world, there's confusion and chaos. There's no confusion with God. All these people who make it sound like God doesn't know what to do. Oh, how false. There's no confusion with God. There's no chaos with Him. It's not a state of emergency with God. It may be for you and I, but it's not for Him. He's in control. He said in Isaiah 14:24, surely as I have brought thought, so shall it come to pass. As I have purposed, so shall it stand. And in Isaiah 46:10-11, my counsel shall stand. And I'll do all my pleasure. I have purposed it. I will also do it. What God has purposed, He will do. And no one can stop it. He is not in a quandary. He's not some distant spectator. He is the absolute authority. Man doesn't like that. He is the absolute authority. He is above all. He is over all. He possesses absolute dominion over all. He rules. He's in control. He manages. He directs. He guides and He governs all things. And He exercises dominion and absolute sovereignty in every realm. And that's according to His pleasure, His purpose. And that cannot be thwarted. And this God is our God. This God is our God. There is nothing that comes into my life outside of His sovereignty. Nothing. Nothing comes into our life outside of the control of God. This God who excels all, who is almighty and sovereign in every realm, is all-knowing. His knowledge is perfect, infallible, without any error, and it's perpetual. Nothing incomplete about His knowledge. There are no bounds to His knowledge. His knowledge is eternal. His knowledge is universal. His knowledge is distinct. In other words, He knows all things very clearly. There's no cloudiness. And this God is our God. Forever and ever, He will be our guide, even unto death. We have a God who knows all things as our guide. There is no problem that He does not have the answer for. There's no problem that He is not the answer for. Whatever your circumstances, whatever your trials, whatever your difficulties, whatever your afflictions, whatever your problems, feelings, thoughts, and doings, He knows. And He's almighty. And He's sovereign. Follow Him. Trust Him. Believe Him. Seek Him. He's our God. This God who excels and who's almighty and sovereign in every realm and who knows all things is all sufficient. In a world that is a spiritual wasteland, He's all that you need. He's everything you need. In a world filled with need, He is all. He's unfailing. He's inexhaustible. And this God is our God. He's greater than any problem or need. And this God is our God. This God who excels all, who is almighty, who is sovereign in every realm, and who knows all, and who is all sufficient, is omnipresent. He's everywhere at the same time. And He's everywhere at the same time as God. Never anything less than God. He's always everywhere. And He's always everywhere as the one who excels all. He's always everywhere as the Almighty. He's always everywhere as the sovereign in every realm. He's always everywhere as the one who knows and as the one who is all-sufficient. And He's our God. He's our God. Equally present in the past, the present, and the future. And He's our God. There are cares, there are trials, there are tribulations, there are afflictions, there are storms. There are oppositions. There are circumstances of life. But nothing is more present than God. And this God is our God. This God who excels all, who is almighty, who is sovereign, who knows all, who is all-sufficient, who is always present, is faithful. He never forgets. He never fails. He never falters. What man does or does not do does not affect the faithfulness of God. 2 Timothy 2:13, if we believe not, yet He abideth faithful. If we believe not, yet He is who He is. God doesn't need you and I to believe to be what He is. God is who He is. God is God. Well, I don't believe that. Doesn't change it. Doesn't change it. Well, I don't agree. Doesn't change it. He's God. And He's faithful. And He's our God. And I can say with Paul, I know whom I have believed. I don't just believe in an idea. I know whom I have believed. Don't just believe a system of doctrine. I know whom I have believed. And I am persuaded that He is able. He is the one in whom I have believed. He is able to keep that which I have committed unto Him. Trust Him. Confide in Him. Lean upon Him. You see, the God of yesterday is the God of today. And the God of today is the God of tomorrow. God is who He is right now. That will not change tomorrow. It will not change 1,000 years from now. He will be who He is. People say all the time, well, you got to realize times are changing. Yes, they are. But God hasn't changed. God hasn't changed. People will say, you've got to change with the times. Well, no, I don't. But let me tell you something. God doesn't. God's the same. God's the same. This God is our God. What a wonderful statement. You and I can know with absolute certainty. This God. This God. The God who excels all. The God who is almighty. The God who is sovereign and knows all and is all-sufficient and who is always present and who is unchanging is our God. He is strength. He is a rock. He is a fortress. He is a buckler. He is a deliverer. He is our high tower. He is a refuge. He is a stay. And since this God is our God, I can say with the psalmist in Psalm 18, He is my strength, my rock, my fortress, my buckler, my deliverer, my high tower, my refuge. You and I that know this God and know that He is our God, knowing that, we should be able to rise above the life of this world. There will be difficulties. There will be temptations. There will be some calamities. And there will be troubles. And there will be adversities. And there will be sorrows. And there will be heartaches along the way. But this God is our God. That makes all the difference in the world. There will be storms to go through. There will be some wildernesses to go through. You may find yourself in a furnace. There will be the attacks from the enemy. But nothing changes this. This God. This God is our God. Believe Him. Trust Him. Depend upon Him. Lean upon Him. Walk with Him. Go with Him. Talk with Him. Cast all upon Him. This God is our God. Every time we open this book and we see God proclaimed, think Psalm 48:14. This God is our God. As you view Him performing miracle after miracle, wonder after wonder, think Psalm 48:14. This God is our God. Oh, may we carry that with us. May that be our life. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us